أشكر سعادة السيد مارك أندري بلانشار.
I thank His Excellency the Chair of Delegation of Canada, Mr. Marc-André Blanchard, and I now wish to give the floor to His Excellency Jean-Claude Felix de Rego, Chair of the Delegation of Benin.
Mr. President, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honour of making this speech on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Patrice Talon, the President of the Republic, who had to leave New York to meet other commitments, and I deliver the following message on his behalf, and I quote, Mr. President, on behalf of the Beninese delegation and on my own behalf, I wish to once again warmly congratulate you on your election to the chair of the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly and to assure you of Benin's full support. I should also like to congratulate Mr. Miroslav Jajczak, your predecessor, for his excellent stewardship during his mandate, and to renew my wishes of success to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, who I hail and support in his work. I should also like to take the opportunity from this high rostrum to congratulate the organisation itself for the meeting that took place on the 24th of September, namely the high-level plenary meeting on the subject of global peace held in honour of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Nelson Mandela. Indeed, Nelson Mandela embodies the essential values on which the United Nations is founded: combating all forms of discrimination, defence of the fundamental rights of each person, the upholding of diversity as a sign of wealth for humanity, tolerance, forgiveness, reconciliation, the fight for recognition of the dignity of all. These are the foundations of his commitment to social justice, to freedom, and to peace in South Africa. Africa will always be immensely grateful to this great humanist, whose name will remain forever in the hearts and the souls of Africans of all generations. This is because he embodied the dream of an Africa standing on its own 2 feet, fully itself, providing its voice and its experience to the development and humanization of our planet. I would also like to pay tribute to another great African, Kofi Annan, who was the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations. His charisma and leadership allowed the organisation to make great progress. He also is worthy of our recognition for his tireless commitment to peace around the world. 2018 has brought particular trials to a number of countries. I would therefore like to renew my condolences and my compassion for the governments and peoples of the United States, France, Indonesia, Madagascar, the Netherlands, the Philippines, Germany and Australia, as well as all of the island countries that were victims of natural disasters during this year. We live in an increasingly turbulent world, a world in the grip of crises and difficulties of all kinds. And in such a world, countries need to work together and with great determination. This is why I welcome the subject of this current session, which is titled Making the United Nations Relevant to All People, Global Leadership and Shared Responsibilities for Peaceful, Equitable and Sustainable Societies. From my country's point of view, This subject places the United Nations before its responsibilities and to commit to working together in a multilateral framework to find suitable long-term solutions to contemporary crises. Benin will continue to believe that international relations should, as a priority, be based on increasingly close cooperation between states. It should also be based on the harmonious functioning of international organizations, one of whose major functions is to guarantee the common interest and collective security. Challenging multilateralism would therefore be a fatal error in a world that from now on will be interconnected. Benin also welcomes the conclusion in July this year at the United Nations of negotiations on a global compact on safe, orderly and regular migration. We are looking forward to its definitive adoption next December in Marrakesh in Morocco. It should be underscored that, once again, this process demonstrates the power of multilateralism. It also demonstrates our ability to agree on difficult issues that go beyond the narrow framework of our national sovereignty. Mr. President, the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda and its implementation represents an important step in promoting and developing states and in allowing peoples to live better. Accelerating its implementation is a major imperative for the government of my country, which is working to find innovative mechanisms to allow for access to resources to assure its financing. These resources exist in sufficient quantities on the market but remain difficult to access, by which I mean financing and aid from development partners. I would nonetheless like to underscore that from the point of view of my government, improving governance is a sine qua non for meeting the objectives of our A New Benin programme and also for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. For this reason, the fight against impunity and corruption are at the heart of my government's work and the work of all of our national institutions. During the course of this year, our legal arsenal has been strengthened and a special court has been set up and is now operational to address economic crimes and terrorism. These measures are necessary in order to guarantee that financial resources are really used for their stated ends. It also aims to make our national stakeholders more honest and to guarantee quality public spending. My government's ambition is to ensure that all of the citizens of our country have access to drinking water, to primary health care, to education, and to a guarantee of a decent life. Achieving this legitimate ambition is what is behind the implementation of a large water project in rural areas and the programme for ensuring the strengthening of human capacity. This aims to provide social security to all citizens, in particular the most disadvantaged. The government of Benin is also working to ensure better health care for the whole of the population. These actions also include those aiming to ensure that medicines sold for therapeutic ends are of high quality. This is a major issue for public health. Benin has begun an implacable fight against low-quality or falsified medicines that circulate in our country. To end this scourge, which is evidently transnational in nature, it is important that the international community work through a global partnership against impunity and indifference to guarantee for the rich and the poor equality of access to high-quality medicines. Furthermore, Benin is committed to a policy of developing tourism which can produce rapid growth and can have a powerful social impact. We have a rich culture, historical legacy, and on the basis of these, Benin is developing flagship projects in tourism, linking our heritage, culture, modernity, and openness to the world. To create the conditions so that tourism can become one of the drivers for our economic growth and of socio-economic development, Benin has therefore undertaken to build 3 museums with the most modern methods of conservation and exhibition to show the world, in a new spirit, its contribution and its role in the development of humanity. With the restitution of our cultural goods, Benin wishes to rehabilitate and to offer to the world the saga of its kings and amazons, the remains of the largest West African port of the history of slavery, as well as the wealth of arts and culture of our voodoo heritage. A number of works that display the evidence of this rich past are held abroad in public and private collections. Their restitution in this context could play an important restorative and economic role. For that reason, since 2016, Benin has been working with determination to achieve the restitution of cultural goods to their country of origin. This is a legitimate fight, and it requires strong actions in international cooperation. Benin therefore welcomes the positive reception from the authorities in France to these demands for restitution. Nonetheless, the question goes beyond purely Franco-Beninese relations. A number of other countries also face the same problems. However, it should be possible to realise that these issues, beyond their historic, sociological or philosophical dimensions, are not well taken into account in international law. Benin would like to encourage the United Nations, in a positive spirit based on cooperation, to look at the opportunity or possibility to adopt an internationally binding instrument on this issue. Mr. President, peace and international security represent a major strategic area and a constant area of our foreign policy in Benin. My country believes that peacekeeping operations are one of the most important tools that the United Nations have to guarantee that peace and security. This is the reason why, even though we have limited capacity and limited means, my country has been involved in international initiatives for several decades, those being international initiatives to prevent crises and to keep peace. My delegation therefore welcomes the recent adoption by the General Assembly of a project to reform the peace and security pillar of the United Nations. We also strongly support the initiatives undertaken by the UN Secretary General to improve the effectiveness of peacekeeping operations, and to do this by the Security Council defining more precise mandates and by establishing a stronger partnership with regional and sub-regional organisations. Benin hails and supports the zero-tolerance policy set up by the United Nations to combat sexual exploitation and abuse in peacekeeping operations. As a troop-contributing country, we are committed to fully playing our role on this matter. My delegation nonetheless remains concerned by the constant decrease in resources available for peacekeeping. The principle of doing more with less is not suitable given the increasing complexity of the threats faced by peacekeepers today in the field. Furthermore, my delegation laments the fact that little progress has been made on the question of UN Security Council reform. We reaffirm our support for the Esselwini Consensus. This demands the granting of 2 permanent Security Council seats to Africa with veto rights. Fair representation of member states within the Security Council would, we are convinced, lead to more inclusive and effective management of the great political issues of our day. Mr. President, Benin has just passed a law on radiological protection. We would like to therefore hail the efforts of the International Atomic Energy Agency to establish a universal plan for the use of nuclear energy for strictly civilian ends. We also renew our support for actions aimed at creating a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. I cannot conclude my words without reaffirming Benin's support for the United Nations efforts to create a viable Palestinian state in possession of full international sovereignty, living side by side and in perfect harmony with the State of Israel. Long live the United Nations in the service of peace, security, the promotion of human rights, democracy, and sustainable development. End of quote. I thank you.
أرجو أن أشكر سعادة السيد جان كلود.
I thank Mr. Jean-Claude Felix de Rego, head of the delegation of Benin, for his statement, and I now give the floor to Ms. Maria Elena Lopez de Jesus Pires, chair of the delegation of Timor-Leste, and I invite her to address the General Assembly.